Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are kicking off the new year. It's January 20th, 2026, by looking at a document that might just define the next decade of global economics. And I really don't say that lightly.
The big one.
We are looking at a seismic shift in how the United States interacts with the African continent. For the last 30, maybe 40 years, the American narrative has been pretty consistent, right? It's been about charity.
Right. It's been about aid, humanitarian relief.
Exactly. PEPFAR, USAID, food programs. The framework was always, how can we help? Or at least, how can we stabilize? But if you look at the documents we have today, specifically this analysis by AISD on the 2025 National Security Strategy that dropped last month, that era is, well, it's effectively dead. It's over.
It is?
The new narrative isn't about charity. It's about business. It is about survival. And specifically, it's about rocks.
It sounds a little blunt when you put it like that, but you're not wrong. We are analyzing a huge pivot from an aid model to what the NSS, the National Security Strategy, is calling an investment and growth paradigm.
Yeah.
But the CISD analysis highlights this one specific phrase that I think just frames this entire discussion perfectly: strategic realism.
Strategic realism. That sounds like corporate speak for the gloves are coming off.
I mean, it's corporate speak for we're behind and we're scared. Strategic realism is basically the admission that the U.S. isn't engaging with Africa just because it's the right thing to do.
So it's not altruism.
Not anymore. They're engaging because the U.S. economy and the U.S. military is dangerously vulnerable. It's a shift from, I guess, altruism to absolute necessity.
Okay, so let's unpack that necessity. Because strategic realism sounds a lot like we need something you have and we need it right now. So what's our mission for this deep dive?
Our mission is to really understand why the U.S. has suddenly, and I mean quite aggressively, repositioned Africa as a commercial partner, not an aid recipient. We need to look at what critical minerals have to do with national security. But I think more importantly, we need to dissect the real friction point here.
Which is?
There's a massive contradiction between the U.S. desire to bring manufacturing home, what they call reshoring, and the African desire to build their own industries, a process we're going to talk a lot about called beneficiation.
Beneficiation. I like that. We're definitely coming back to that. But first, let's start with the why. Why now? Why did the 2025 NSS suddenly decide that, geology is a top-tier national security issue?
In one phrase, supply chain security. The CAISD analysis of the NSS makes this crystal clear. The United States has had this realization that it cannot depend on any single external power for components that are critical to its national defense and its economy.
And when the document says single external power, they're not talking about, like, Switzerland or Canada. We're reading between the lines here. This is about China, isn't it?
Yeah. The document uses very diplomatic language, non-hemispheric actors. But yes, it's China. The NSS explicitly highlights that these actors have made major inroads into Africa over the last 2 decades. They've built infrastructure, ports, railways.
And in exchange, they locked down the supply chains for all these critical minerals.
Exactly. The U.S. view, at least according to the NSS, is that these were predatory economic practices. But honestly, whether you call it predatory or just good strategy, the result is the same.
Which is that the U.S. is playing catch-up.
A serious game of catch-up. They are acknowledging, finally, that they are losing the race for the raw materials that will build the entire 21st century.
It really feels like the U.S. woke up, looked at the scoreboard, realized they were down 10-0, and just decided to change the sport entirely.
That's a good way to put it. And they know they can't win alone. The strategy actually outlines mobilizing European and Asian allies to form a kind of collective position on African minerals.
Wait, Asian allies?
Specifically India. The NSS mentions bringing India into the fold to create a more unified front.
That is fascinating. So you have the U.S., the EU, and now India all trying to coordinate a mining strategy. That sounds less like a partnership and, more like a really high-stakes, messy game of risk.
That's the strategic realism part. I mean, it creates this very intense dynamic. The U.S. is basically telling its allies, if you let a geopolitical rival control the cobalt, the lithium, the rare earths, you effectively hand them the keys to the future.
Right.
You can't build an EV fleet, you can't build a green energy grid, and you certainly can't build precision-guided missiles without these specific minerals.
Okay, so the U.S. is desperate. They need access. But this is a transaction now. You said we move from aid to investment. So if the U.S. wants the rocks, what's on the table? Because in the old days, it was, here's some money for a hospital. What's the currency now?
This is where the CASD report breaks down a really specific and honestly kind of eclectic suite of technologies. The U.S. isn't offering to build roads. China does that cheaper.
Sure.
The U.S. is offering high-tech leverage, specifically U.S.-backed nuclear energy technology.
Nuclear energy in the NSS.
Yes. Small modular reactors, or SMRs.
That seems bold.
Yeah.
We're talking about regions that have historically struggled with grid stability, not to mention political stability. And the U.S. pitch is, here, have a nuclear reactor.
It sounds totally counterintuitive, but think about the primary bottleneck for industrialization in Africa. It's power. It's always been power. You can't run a smelter or a massive refinery on a shaky grid that browns out every day.
So the U.S. is saying, we can fix your energy baseload with clean, consistent power.
Exactly. They're also offering liquid petroleum gas, LPG, and liquefied natural gas, LNG technologies. So basically, we'll help you keep the lights on so you can run the machines.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then at the complete other end of the spectrum, they're offering advancements in AI and digital finance.
That is a wild combination. It's like, we will trade you these ancient rocks we just dug out of the ground for ChatGPT and nuclear fission.
It is a stark contrast, but there is a logic to it.
Yeah.
The U.S. is trying to use its comparative advantage. They know they can't outbuild China on concrete, so they're trying to out-innovate them.
The pitch is, partner with us. You get access to the cutting edge of the digital economy and the energy transition.
Pretty much.
But technology doesn't work in a vacuum, right? There has to be a political element to the offer, too.
Yeah.
You can't build a billion-dollar data center if there's a civil war happening down the road.
Yes. And this is where it gets really interesting, and you could argue a bit cynical. The NSS mentions that the U.S. is offering its diplomatic muscle to, and I'm quoting here, surgically extinguish embers of division.
Surgically extinguish embers of division?
Wow. That is a very poetic way of saying intervention.
It is extremely careful wording. They are not talking about boots on the ground. They are talking about high-level diplomatic pressure to stop conflicts that threaten the supply chains.
And the document lists specific examples.
Oh, yes. Negotiating settlements between the DRC and Rwanda, stabilizing Sudan, and preventing conflict in the Horn of Africa between Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. It's pretty hard not to notice the geography there. The DRC and Rwanda. That's where all the cobalt is. Sudan has gold and strategic ports. It really feels like the U.S. is saying, we didn't intervene for humanitarian reasons for years, but now that we need the lithium, we're going to surgically extinguish the fighting.
And that is precisely why CISD calls it strategic realism.
Right.
The goal isn't peace for the sake of peace. The goal is a stable, predictable environment that's safe for long-term U.S. investment.
Right. You can't ensure a supply chain in a war zone.
You can't. If you want to pull billions of dollars of copper out of the ground, you need to know that the road to the port is going to be open next week.
So the pitch is, we give you high-tech energy and AI, and we force your neighbors to stop shooting at you. In exchange, we get reliable access to your minerals.
That is the core of the deal. But, and this is the biggest but of the entire episode, there's a fundamental conflict in how this deal is structured. And it comes down to that word I mentioned earlier.
Beneficiation.
Beneficiation.
All right, let's define that properly, because I feel like that is going to be the buzzword of the next decade in geopolitics. What exactly is beneficiation?
It's actually pretty simple. Beneficiation is just the process of adding value to raw materials before you export them. It's the difference between digging up bauxite and selling it for, say, pennies on the dollar,
Right.
versus refining that bauxite into aluminum, or even better, manufacturing aluminum car parts and selling those for a huge profit. It's about processing, refining, manufacturing.
Okay, so moving up the food chain. Instead of just selling the flour, you want to sell the bread.
Right.
Or even better, you want to own the bakery.
Exactly. And this is where the friction points lie in the 2025 NSS. Because on one hand, the United States is very clear about its domestic goals. It wants reshoring and reindustrialization.
That America First orientation.
Yes, the NSS talks a lot about prioritizing American workers and manufacturing.
I think I see where this is going. If the U.S. wants to bring all the manufacturing jobs back to Ohio or Arizona, but African nations want to build their own manufacturing industries, those two goals don't really fit together.
They are almost mutually exclusive. And that is the contradiction. CISD's analysis points this risk out explicitly. If the U.S. prioritizes its domestic manufacturing too much, Africa risks remaining just a dig site.
All the raw materials just leave the continent.
Right. The fear is that the raw materials are extracted from Africa and all the high-value processing, the stuff that actually creates wealth, the stuff that builds a middle class, all of that happens in U.S. facilities.
So these targeted partnerships the U.S. is proposing might end up limiting technology transfer.
That's
It sounds like we'll give you the AI to run the mine more efficiently so we get our rocks faster, but we won't give you the factory to build the batteries.
That is the concern. The NSS mentions targeted partnerships that align incentives, but it leaves the door wide open for a scenario where the value add stays in the U.S. It's the classic resource curse trap, just with the, a green energy sticker on it.
But this is where it gets really interesting, because the source material shows that Africa isn't just sitting there waiting to see what happens. African nations are pushing back.
They absolutely are.
They're not just accepting these terms. They're changing the rules of the game.
This is maybe the most crucial shift in the narrative. We are seeing a wave of African agency that we just haven't seen in previous decades when it comes to resource extraction. Policymakers are actively changing their laws to force this beneficiation to happen locally.
And the stats here are wild. Since 2023, at least 13 countries have introduced export restrictions on raw critical minerals. They are literally banning the export of raw rocks.
They're saying if you want this mineral, you have to process it here. It's a bold move. It's a way of reclaiming leverage in these negotiations.
Let's look at some examples because they're fascinating. Malawi, as of 2025, has a full ban on raw mineral exports. If you want their rare earth deposits, you have to build a factory in Malawi. End of story.
And it's not just individual bans, it's regional cooperation. Look at the landmark deal between the DRC and Zambia. In 2025, they established a transboundary battery and electric vehicle special economic zone.
A transboundary special economic zone. That is huge. That's two sovereign nations linking up their industrial policy to say, we're going to make the batteries right here.
And they're supported by Bank and UNECA. It shows a level of strategic coordination that makes it much harder for external powers, whether that's the U.S. or China, to just divide and conquer. They're creating an entire ecosystem.
And then you have Ethiopia. I read this in the report and I had to double check it. They have a goal of 500,000 electric vehicles by 2030. That just sounds incredibly ambitious.
It is ambitious, but look at the policy signals supporting it. Ethiopia is restricting the import of internal combustion engines. And you're seeing similar incentives popping up all over the continent.
Where else?
Kenya, Nigeria, Rwanda, Tanzania, they're all offering tax breaks and duty exemptions for EV assembly. Tanzania is even shifting its public fleets to compressed natural gas.
So the message is clear. We don't just want to mine the cobalt for your EVs. We want to drive the EVs. We want to build the EVs.
Exactly. They want to nurture their own downstream industries. CISD emphasizes that these nations are vigorously advocating for these beneficiation clauses in all their partnerships. They want to transform raw exports into sustained industrial growth.
So we have the U.S. strategy. We need your rocks, we'll give you security and tech, but we want to build the stuff in America.
Right.
And we have the African strategy. You can have the rocks, but you have to build the stuff here. How does this resolve? What's the outlook?
Well, the NSS claims this will all create a virtuous cycle. The vision is that U.S. resources support African stability and African minerals support U.S. industry, a kind of symbiotic relationship.
That sounds like the brochure version. Everybody wins.
Ideally. And the CISD verdict is that this could be a win-win, but, and this is a very significant condition, it only works if African nations negotiate hard. Really hard.
They have to get those beneficiation clauses in the contract.
They have to be ironclad. If they rely on goodwill or, vague promises of future partnership, they will lose.
And there's a catch from the U.S. side too, right? The conditionalities. The U.S. money isn't free.
No, U.S. investment almost always comes with strings attached. The NSS explicitly mentions linking investments to reducing influence from adversarial actors.
So choose us or them.
Basically, it creates a real dilemma for African nations who might want to trade with everyone. They might want Chinese infrastructure and American nuclear tech. But the U.S. approach is heavily focused on countering those non-hemispheric actors.
So if a country is too deeply in bed with Chinese infrastructure loans, the U.S. might hesitate to share that sensitive nuclear or AI technology.
They absolutely might. It puts these African leaders in a really tough spot. They have to thread the needle between two superpowers who are actively trying to box each other out of the continent.
That's how wire acts.
It is. The 2025 NSS views Africa as a dynamic economic partner, which is a step up from global burden. But being a partner in a high-stakes strategic competition means you have to be very sharp. You have to read all the fine print.
So what does all this mean for you, the listener? Why should you, sitting in Chicago or Berlin or Tokyo, care about beneficiation clauses and export bans in Malawi?
You should care because the device you are using to listen to this deep dive right now depends on it. The smartphone in your pocket, the laptop on your desk, and certainly the electric vehicle that might be in your driveway. The supply chains for these things are being rewritten as we speak.
The cost, the availability, and even the ethics behind those products
Yeah.
are all tied up in these very specific negotiations.
And on a broader level, this is about the future of the global economy. If Africa succeeds in forcing local manufacturing, it could fundamentally change the cost structure of modern technology. It could create a more diversified, more resilient global market.
Right.
Or, if the friction causes supply chains to fracture, we could see costs for everything just skyrocket.
Which brings us to our final thought for you to chew on. The U.S. strategy emphasizes reshoring jobs to America while asking Africa for its resources. It just begs the question, can a partnership truly be mutually beneficial if one side provides the raw materials and the other keeps all the high-value manufacturing?
Or is this just colonialism with better technology? That's the question we have to keep asking as we watch these deals unfold over the next few years.
Colonialism with better technology. That is a heavy thought to leave us with, but a really important one. We will be tracking these deals as they get signed or rejected. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Keep questioning.